Hello, everyone. I'm David Jobin, and on behalf of everyone here at Our Fund Foundation, I want to thank you and welcome you. Before we get started, I want to thank the Howard Greenfield Charitable Fund for making this virtual get-together possible. If you're not familiar with Our Fund Foundation, we're an LGBT community foundation. We do our work at the intersection of wealth and need, and we help philanthropists to amplify their giving to LGBT causes. I like to say that we're here to make South Florida the most livable place in the country for LGBT people, which brings us why we're together today. This election that we're still in the middle of has an incredible resonance for LGBT folks. Our rights could hang in the balance depending on who leads this country. So I think it's understandable that there is a lot of anxiety in our community around this election. And when you couple that with the isolation that we're all experiencing as a result of COVID, I think it creates a really detrimental effect on our mental health and well-being. And as a community foundation, one of our priorities is the mental health and well-being of the LGBT community. So we pulled together some community leaders so that they could provide some light in this moment to us. I'm going to turn it over now to my very good friend, Fred Tan, who is going to help us talk about how we're going to get through today and help lead us through the conversation. So Fred, I will turn this over to you.
Hello, David, and hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. First of all, I'd like to thank David and our fund for organizing this important event at such a critical moment in our lives. I think right this very second is a perfect time for the community to gather and to really support each other, and as we seek, all of us, to gain a little peace of mind. So today we're honored to have August Gold, who is a transformational speaker, a spiritual teacher, and an author whose books have been translated into 15 different languages. She's a veteran volunteer at organizations supporting people facing life-changing issues, such as Manhattan Center for Living, Gay Men's Health Crisis Center, and the Samaritan Suicide Hotline. Her Fort Lauderdale talks are open and free to the public and are designed to support everyone in experiencing more impactful and abundant inner and outer lives. Welcome, August. Also with us today is Dr. Chris Michaels. Chris is a husband, a spiritual teacher, a national speaker, an entrepreneur, and an author. And for over 30 years, he's inspired, empowered, and educated others to find their true calling. He's authored a number of programs, such as Turning Obstacles into Opportunities, Value-Driven Leadership, Start a Movement, Not Just a Business, and the Life Purpose Project. Chris is a keynote speaker, having spoken at over 1,000 conferences and events around the world. He speaks on entrepreneurship, mindfulness, and living an authentic life. Currently, Chris is the spiritual director at Center for Spiritual Living in Fort Lauderdale. Welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for the meditation, man.
Oh, yes.
I needed that.
Most welcome. You're most welcome. I'd like to start us off by sharing with everybody who's online that regardless of our party's affiliation, our social or economic views, it's clear that we live in a time, obviously, that so much is at stake. Many of us have referred to it as an existential time for us. I think David opened this, his opening remarks were so apt. So let me first ask you to open this whole conversation, August and Chris, by asking you, what advice can you offer each of us so that we can meet this moment with an open heart and a calm mind?
Well, I was asked to do a marketing presentation to colleagues a few years ago. So I did some research on generations. And what I learned is that my father's generation, who was in his 80s, they respect authority. They do what they're told by authority. My generation, the baby boomers, we question authority, and the millennials ignore authority. So what I learned when I was speaking with my dad about his condition in his 80s, I called him up one day and I said, "Dad, how are you doing?" And he says, "I don't know, I'm going to the doctor later." And I said, "You're waiting for the doctor to tell you how you're feeling and how you're doing?" And he said, "Well, yeah, the doctor knows that." And I said, "Don't you think you know more about who you are and how you're feeling and how you could be than the doctor?" And so it was particularly useful for me because I believe that no matter what's going on around me, no matter what the conditions are of the politics of the world or all the stuff that's happening, I'm the one that gets to decide how I am. And my challenge is to do that every single day, is to wake up every day and say, this is how I'm going to be. I'm going to show up in this moment in joy. I'm going to be happy regardless of how many people around me are unhappy. I'm not going to be stressed out and be infected by the world's drama and trauma. I'm actually going to affect the world with my own sense of peace and calm. And so I really do believe that you and I and everybody have to make a choice, a conscious choice every day, how they show up. And August and I have talked about this numerous times, right?
Yes, usually holding alcohol in our hands as we do. So we talk loquaciously.
Yeah.
So let me add to that. There were two statues that were facing each other in a beautiful park for forever, for as long as anybody could remember. And one day, an angel from heaven came down and said, "You know, you statues, both of you, the male and the female statue that have been looking at each other year after year, you've provided such a beautiful service that heaven has decided that you can actually have 30 minutes of life. I'm going to give you 30 minutes of life starting now." Well, they both jumped off their pedestals, and the male statue looked at the female statue, and they scampered off into the woods. And over the course of the 15 minutes, the angel can hear rustling and leaves crackling and branches crackling and lots of noise going on for 15 minutes. So after the 15 minutes, they come back out and the angel says, "Are you done?" And they say, "Yes, we're done." And he says, "You know, you have 15 more minutes to be alive if you want it." And he said, "Do you want it?" And the male statue looked at the female statue and said, "Do you?" She goes, "Oh yeah, I totally do." She goes, "But this time you hold the pigeon down and I shit on his head."
And the moral of the story is,
Wait, the reason I'm saying it is we're dealing with 2020, and I can't tell you how many t-shirts I have seen for sale that say the shit show that is 2020. And we have to, as human beings, honor the fact that this year has been out of control. It's been unprecedented. It's been unlike anything we've ever experienced. It has pushed every one of our human buttons. And of course, the human part of our nature is going to have all sorts of feelings about it. So that when I went to the Manhattan Center for Living and volunteered there, not exclusively, but extensively during the AIDS crisis, as all of us did who were around at that time, what I discovered was that at the Manhattan Center for Living, people were experiencing healings, experiencing breakthroughs in their hearts opening and being able to access their feelings and being excited to live again and making amends. I mean, they were waking up to love. Their hearts were opening in this center. And the reason I bring this up is that all the volunteers like myself that were there as often as we were allowed and were volunteering everywhere and were in ACT UP on the streets in our activism, we were all burning out. And what I realized in that moment is that the one person that is forgotten in this great crisis, in a time of crisis, always ends up being us. And so I want to say, in answer to Fred's question, the first place we have to start as a human being is to acknowledge that we've been through what people are calling a shit show. And we feel like shitting on somebody's head at times, or feel like ours is being shat upon. And it's the right and perfect moment to let our human self that feels like it's happening to it, life is happening to it, that part of us needs to go into a room and hit some pillows. Just needs to take a dish towel, one of those good old fashioned, I'm giving you my therapy tips that I got in my 30s. You take a dish towel and you wring the neck of the dish towel of the neck of the person you want to wring. When you're hitting the pillows, you can say any 4-letter word that you want. And if you've got some screaming to do, you get into your car on a back road or the highway and you let yourself scream as loud as you want. Why? Because we need to express our human frustration, the whole range of feelings of what we're feeling, to get it out, not as a way of life, but just to express what it is we're feeling that's been so assaulting and so insulting and injurious to us throughout this whole year. So you first in line needs to have the attention of allowing yourself to express all your feelings for the period of time it takes to express them.
You know, this reminds me of a story that was told about Oscar Wilde. And when he was on trial in 19th century Victorian England for being a homosexual, the prosecuting attorney takes one look at him in the witness stand and said, "Mr. Wilde, you disgust me. Your entire life has been lived in the gutter." To which he replied, "My dear sir, we are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking up at the stars." And therein, I think, lies our challenge, is for us, we are in the gutter of the human experience, but some of us are reaching for the stars. And it's to keep our focus on that which is greater than we are. You know, there's a couple things that we think we're really a divided nation right now, and that's the whole story. We're deeply divided as a nation, but there's some things that we share in common on the red side and on the blue side of states. And there's some very profound and important things. And we wouldn't be hurt or offended or insulted or angry or upset about this election if we didn't care, if we didn't love this country. All people on both sides of this aisle love this country. And that's why it hurts so much. And that's why you're so angry and you're so frustrated, because your idea of what is right for the country differs from what their idea is right, but you share that in common. And I'm reading Pete Buttigieg's book called Trust. I'm loving this book. And in it, he says, to love a country as to love a person is to love a flawed and exquisite creation. And I love that, because this country is a flawed and exquisite creation. It's an experiment. And when you get people in a room together who have varying ideas and different opinions about how you should move forward, this is the time for us to actually seek first to understand and then to be understood. And that is our greatest challenge, because we live in this echo chamber where we only talk to and listen to people who believe exactly as we do. And we've stopped looking for common ground, and we're pointing fingers, and we're all in the gutter. And so every single day we have got to lift ourselves up out of the gutter with some kind of spiritual practice. I love the meditation that Fred did. Can you come to my house every morning at 8 o'clock and do that for me, please? And August, I love what you said, because we as a community don't tend to do that. Recognize that we are humans with feelings, and we're frustrated, and we need to express those, because the tendency of the gay people and lesbian and community is that we stuff those feelings. We medicate those feelings. We put them aside, we ignore them, we drink cocktails. We don't take care of ourselves. Self-care. Self-care.
Yeah, and it's more than, it's not drinking a recreational cocktail. When we don't let the feelings out and they turn within, they end up turning against us. We end up finding ourselves in addictions that we can no longer control, that are spiraling out of control. And we think, what's wrong with me? And the realization is nothing is wrong with us. We just need to move the energy of our human bodies and let our human bodies have its own response. There's a therapist that he works with animals. And he did this study, and I forget his name. I think his last name might be Levine, but I'm not sure. Peter Levine, maybe, but I shouldn't have said anything. I'm not sure what his name is. Mm-hmm. He said that in the wild, when animals go through a traumatic experience, which we really are going through emotionally and mentally and politically and environmentally and economically, we're experiencing levels of trauma and don't have a forum for expressing that healthily. When animals are attacked by another animal and manage to survive, he says, what they do is the animal stands up when the predator is gone or has left it behind for whatever reason. The animal stands up and begins a process that is utterly intuitive, instinctual to animals. They begin to shake the muscles of their body from the top of their head all the way down until every single muscle group from tip to toe has shaken off the energy of terror it just experienced. Okay. And there was so much trauma that was experienced in the gay community on both sides of the fence, whether you were part of the AIDS epidemic or you were in the healing arts on that side of the epidemic, and we weren't given a place, or we didn't know how to take the place of putting ourselves first when so many things needed to be attended to and so many other people needed help more than we did. Because it doesn't show when we're holding in our trauma.
To me, that's the value of doing something like this, is to reach out to our community, because we do have a community and we do need to gather together to support each other. And it's funny you should bring that up about the animals, because I was in Chiang Mai at an elephant reserve a few years ago, and I witnessed that most beautiful thing taking place. There were elephants and they were in the water, they were in the river bathing, and there was a little baby elephant and it fell into a little hole in the water and it started crying. And at that moment, all of the adult elephants surrounded it, and all the ones came from offshore to rally around that baby elephant until it stopped crying. And then when it did, and it realized its trauma was over, they all exited and went around their way. And I thought, God, if we were smart enough as elephants, if we would, in our times of trauma, if we would gather together to support each other, let's rally around each other and say, hey, we're in this together. We've got something good we can do together, and share our human pain, but also because you can't stop there. There's the human pain, but you can't stop there, or you get stuck there. And if you get stuck there, then you rally, you just circle around into some kind of addiction and negative process. And so the challenge is to us to reach for the stars, to say, what is the best part of this community? And how can we move forward as a community, as a people together, to create something really wonderful? To me, that was the genius of the logo Love Wins. Because for a long time in the 80s and 90s, straight people thought, oh, gay people, it's gross, yuck, yuck, yuck. And I said, they don't get it. They think it's about sex, but it's about love. It's not about what you're doing with your body parts with another person. It's about who you have the capacity in your heart to love. And so, we have so many things in common that we can support each other with. And rallying like this and telling our stories together, creating a forum where we can share our pain and our divine wisdom, I think is so powerful.
No kidding, man. I will tell you, the amount of time you need to spend to express your feelings fully, I learned in the AIDS mastery classes, there were workshops that were given in New York at the time, is a full expression of emotion is 3 minutes from beginning to end. And in Tuesdays with Maury, if you remember that wonderful book from a number of decades ago, Maury was dying of ALS slowly. And somebody came to interview him, one of his former students, every Tuesday. And here's what Maury said. Maury said, I wake up every morning. Now, Maury knew he was dying, and he was dying a slow and painful death. And he was conscious during that process, not in denial, not in rage, not in anger, in acceptance of it. But it doesn't mean that you live forever in the human fear of it and the feelings of expression. He said 9:30 to 10 o'clock, 9:30 to 10 o'clock every morning. He woke up and he railed and he cried and he wept deeply. And he felt like the victim that his human self told him he was. He let himself have every bit of anger and every feeling he had until 10 o'clock. When 10 o'clock came, he went into this other mode. And keep in mind, this other mode is like right in front of our faces. And the other mode is our last name, for heaven's sake. We are human beings, and we totally are working with the human self, and that's great. But then, as you said, Chris, we can't stop there. At 10 o'clock, Maury returned to his life. And in his life, he addressed what was in front of him, but from a very different level of consciousness, from his last name, from the being part of his human self. And the being part of our nature is the energetic part of our nature that animates this body. It's animating us. Our body is vacant without the energetic soul, our inner being. That's our name, human, which is person and personal and personality driven, the body, and being, which is our soul. So I'm between a rock and a hard place in New York. I'll tell you one of my stories, but it's not as adorable as a baby elephant story, for heaven's sake. Right? So I'm in my place that was a regular apartment in a regular part of New York City, 23rd Street and Park Avenue South. And then they decided to call it the Flatiron District, which meant I got a notice under my door saying my rent was going up by like 60%. And I had just left the corporate world at 33 to follow my destined call into ministry. Well, I couldn't pay that rent. I was just beginning. It was impossible. So I did the next best thing. I called up the government and said, is this allowed? The Bureau of Landlords and Renters. And I said, can they do this? And they said, yeah, it's 100% legal, right? So only after I found out that what they're doing is legal. And I didn't have the money to stay yet, and I didn't have the money to move. So I prayed. And what a prayer is, and my prayers are very simple and very grounded. And I simply said, shrink the rent. That was my prayer, 3 words, very easy. You can't mistake it for anything else. Shrink the rent, shrink the rent. And I said it with such utter conviction and expectation that it would be answered, that it was, to this day, I get goosebumps thinking about it, it was answered. And I'll tell you exactly what the answer was, because this was the moment where I began to understand what that other part of my nature was here for. What you said, we have to grow past this place. It said in response to shrink the rent, it said, don't ask me to shrink life. Ask me to grow you.
Ooh. See, I was going to have you do a prayer for shrink the waist. So, because I'm trying to get back into my 32-inch pants, because I'm like, if this story ends and she shrunk the rent, I'm there for you, child. I am calling on you after this is over and say, can you shrink the waist? That's what I'm working on right now.
You're a deep and holy man, Chris, that is for sure. But look, it's exactly dovetails with what you are saying, which is, this is the place in us that doesn't look at 2020 as a shit show at all. It looks at it as a year of great transformation and evolution, where we are literally being called to evolve. And to evolve is another way of saying to grow, to come to fruition, as all creation does. And whenever we are handed anything in the moment, what life is saying to us is, use this to grow yourself. Let me help to grow you. And if we don't know that, that what's happening to us is happening for us, we end up stopping right at the place you said, where 9:30 to 10 o'clock becomes 9:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night. And we are negative about everything. We are now in resistance, in victimhood to this evolutionary gift that our being says, thank you, I'm going to take this and use it to transform. Such a different consciousness.
Nobody ever thinks of that when they're in the midst of the trauma or the challenge. It's like you never say, oh, thank you for this horrible thing I'm going through, that it's going to grow and challenge me. But you know, if you live long enough and you continue to grow, you can look back and you can see how things really were for you. One of the most brilliant things that you say, that I quote you on all the time, is everything that is happening to you is happening for you. And it really makes me stop and look at the things that have happened to me in my life. And I was thinking about this recently because, you know, we all have this sort of trauma of being gay, you know, growing up in a world that hates us. And when I was 10 years old, I was walking home from school, like a lot of, you know, cute little gay boys were, and I got bullied and beat up. And, you know, they threw me down on the ground. They put, you know, dirt in my mouth. I'll never forget that because it was so humiliating, the taste of that dirt. And they, you know, beat me up and then they ran away. And I lay there on the ground for a while after everyone was gone, crying. And I thought, you know, to myself, as I spit that dirt out of my mouth, you know, I said to myself, you know, Chris, you're not going to be a good fighter. And so you're going to have to learn to use something else if you're ever going to win in life. You're going to need to use your mind. You're going to need to outsmart them. But the most important thing that I can say that happened for me on that day, because that's a terrible thing to happen to a young boy. But what happened for me, the adult Chris Michaels that I learned in that moment, somehow I made a conscious choice. And I said, these people that acted out of their own pain, that did this to me, I will not let them damage me. And I will not repeat their pain by doing it to myself again in some self-destructive manner and way. So that thing that happened to me, being beat up by other boys, the for me part of it, it came to a place where I made a conscious choice to not be a victim of someone else's bad behavior, someone else's pain, someone else's humanness, and yet seek that which is greater within me. Emerson says we each take our own from the multiplicity that sweeps and circles round us. And I do believe that there is a power greater than we are in life that has everything really under control. And that helps me a lot when life seems out of control. Like
yeah, and people are not going to believe that just because you said so. It's not going to make a difference what we say. What's going to make a difference is having an experience of that greaterness you're talking about, that greater power that's greater than our own human brain telling us what to do in each moment to be safe. It's an experience that you need to have. And you in having that experience can speak about it, but if I'm listening to you, I need to have that experience in order to understand why you can stand so firmly on the ground and be certain that you're safe. Because here's the thing about safety. We could build the tallest walls, we could make the greatest guns, we could make the greatest nuclear weapons, but if we are not able to connect to the safety, which is a frequency, an energy, a vibration in the present moment, if we can't feel what you call into that greater power, that life force, that source of energy, that universal flow. These are just different names for the same thing. If we don't connect to it, we will never feel that safety. We can't feel that safety. So I have to say there is a woman named Etty. I remember her first name, and Etty went through the concentration camps. And I'm using this example of the concentration camps not because that's what we're experiencing, but suffering is suffering. And Viktor Frankl, the man who wrote the man's search for meaning, he said that we need to meet the moment not with what the moment is going to give us, but what we're going to bring to the moment. the attitude we're going to bring, the altitude we're going to bring. And we're only going to bring it from moment to moment into the moment. So Eddie told her son after she got out of the concentration camps, amazingly, she said, here is what saved me. She said, I carried two things with me on my person every single day through the camps. One was a broken piece of comb. And the other, she said, was a crust, just a crust of bread. And she said, I did this because even though I was surrounded by conditions that were nightmarish, that were hellish, surrounded by people who didn't see me as a person, as a woman, as worthy, as valuable, as deserving, but as a number they tattooed on my arm. She said, I woke up every morning and I put that broken comb through my hair. And at night before I went to bed on the slabs of wood where everybody was crunched in together, side to side to side, she would comb her hair before bed with the broken piece of the comb to feel her own personhood. And she said, I carried the crust of bread because she said, I knew that if I could carry a crust of bread when everybody's starving, including myself, that I always had something to give someone who was having a harder time than I was. That's what our being nature provides. When we move to the altitude of that energy that is greater, when we tap in to the beingness, not because we're spiritual people on a spiritual path, just because we want to step into the fullness of our own consciousness, our fully human consciousness, body, mind, and also the spirit, the energy that moves through us, what we discover is we have a different experience of the moment. We have a different altitude in the moment, and we end up having an experience in the moment that allows us to become grown, to become greater than when the experience started, instead of broken into a million shards.
I think the thing that these stories and all of our comments today have in common is that, you got to wake up every day and decide who you are and what you're going to be. And you can't be affected by the world, or probably infected by the world, and just be victimized, because it's so done. The whole I'm a victim of the world's horrible stuff and tragedy is so done. It's so easy to become angry and cynical and bitter, particularly as you get older. And the challenge before us all is to not become that, is to not become one of the world's walking wounded, is to make conscious choices every single day for self-care, for the understanding that I'm more than my body, that I am a being. Like your second name is I'm being. And I'm going to be happy today. And I'm going to be in joy today. And I'm going to find and focus on those things which I love and make my heart sing, regardless of who the president of the United States is, or who controls the Congress, or whatever else is happening in the LGBTQ community. I am going to be well and happy. And that's a choice and a decision that every one of us has to make every day. Make that choice. Make that choice.
And I think we haven't been trained to know, we haven't been educated to know that it's a choice. I mean, Hafiz says to us, everybody's going to get an invitation from the divine, meaning everybody's going to have life come knocking on their door. All the time, life comes knocking on our door. We will be invited by the divinity of life, by life itself, to come into the moment. And he said there are only two ways to answer that invitation, just two, which makes things easy. One is we can meet the moment by being dressed for dancing, right? Dressed for dancing, not dressed for yoga, dressed for dancing. Or we're going to be carried on a stretcher into God's ward, into the sick ward. And what he's saying is we have a choice. Moses, believe it or not, Moses said the same thing when he was standing with all of his community. And they were standing at the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army is following them, and they can't go forward and they can't go back, right? I didn't have the money to move, and I didn't have the money to stay. And just what we're dealing with now, we're between a rock and a hard place. He said this to the community of people that he was leading. He said, stand still. He wanted them to stop and stand still, to meet the moment by standing in the moment. And it's a particularly interesting word in Hebrew, because Moses used it and Abraham used it when God called them from the heavens, as the stories from the Bible go. They both answered the same way, which was hineni. And hineni means, here I stand. So not only does the moment come, and I'm speaking to how we can step out of that victim response, that victim default that so many of us are just trapped in. We stand in the moment, and standing in the moment, what that does is you're here now. You're offering your presence to the moment, not your absence. And then he said, stand still. And then he said, fear not, right? And not the next two words, fear not. And instead of fear not, if I were to update it, I would say love strong. Choose whether you're going to be in the field of evolution or devolution, because we can only stand in one field of energy at a time. And if you're standing in the present moment, then the field of energy is the field of movement, of upwardness, as Michael Singer would say, an upward energy. It's the flow. It's a yes to life. It's a go. It's a moving with the flow, going with the flow of life. The whole Tao Te Ching is about moving with the flow. And when we're doing that, we are literally choosing whether in this moment I'm voting for the evolution of humanity or the devolution of humanity, by what field I choose to stand in. And you nailed it. The field of love and the field of fear are the only two fields. And we are either in one or the other. And one is upstairs in the light and one is downstairs in the shadows. That's the deal. And in the moment, he said, stand still, fear not. Think of it as choosing which field you're going to stand in, love or fear. Choose one. And the last thing he said was watch the wonder. Watch the wonder that's going to unfold. Meaning, choose higher vibration, just like Etty did with her comb and her piece of bread. If you have to be in an environment not of your choosing, then change the inner environment from which you meet it. So choose the highest note that you can play in that moment. And what you're doing, that whole victim consciousness that lives in the field of fear, you've transcended it and you're having a different experience entirely. Now you can choose happiness.
And
now you can choose
and that's
anything.
your choice every single day.
Every single moment.
Every single moment.
Of every single day. And you said it. The Course in Miracles says it the same way. Heaven is a decision we must make. You're saying it, and so am I. Love, standing in the field of love, is a decision we must make. Because if we don't, the field that we stand in is the one that moves through us. It's the one we offer the world. It's the one we give to our body. It's the one we're actually gifting to the world. And it's not the one that grows us.
And it creates all of the experience that come to you from that moment forward. Hey, Fred, nice to see you again.
Thank you, Chris and August. This is beautiful. This is really wonderful. Thank you for sharing these pearls with us. You've offered us so much by way of perspective, by way of really showing us that we need to honor the energy and the feelings that we have and move it as humans. And then we need to also keep that soul perspective, that focus on the stars. So I love that balance. From from a more practical, everyday moment, we're all engaged now with the final votes that are coming in, where all of our eyes are plugged to the news. How do we tap into what you, August, mentioned as life source or universal flow, or that connect to that feeling of safety while this chaos is whirling around us? How can we feel safe and at the same time be fully present to my life experience?
Well, at the eye of a hurricane is where the calm is. And, there's a place there where, the spokes on a wheel all converge to a single point that doesn't move, but it initiates all the friction and the movement. So there is a place at the center of all things, at the center of a galaxy, at the center of a wheel, at the center of a hurricane, where peace resides. And that we forget that that's in us, that there is a center within us that has been left untouched by the nonsense that goes on around us. And we forget, and you reminded us at the top of the hour by this, concentrated effort, this conscious effort to let's close our eyes, let's turn away from, stop looking at, stop the drama, turn off the TV, stop the incessant feed of monkey chatter, and stop for a minute and go to the center, go to the source, go to the center and be still. There's that whole thing in the Bible says, be still and know that I am God. And I read that, and basically for me, it says, would you just shut up already? Would you shut up already and just listen and just know? Because something in you, which is your peaceful center, your core, God, whatever you want to call it, spirit, life, energy source, whatever it is at peace all of the time. It is not sick. It is always well, and it is always there for you. Go there. Find a practice that takes you there and do it regularly every single day, because you got to go back out in the noise.
Well, and it's so beautiful what you're saying. And I think we hear that and we say, okay, I'm going to get still from time to time. I'm going to put aside 10 minutes in the morning and maybe 5 minutes at night. But here's what I discovered when I was in my own very, very traumatic moment of my life after the cancer journey concluded. And Carol, the spirit, the soul, the beingness of Carol left her body. She left the world of form, and her energy is here, but moved on out of the envelope of her body. I knew that where I was headed was, everybody told me, you're headed into a year or 2 or 3 or 5 of mourning. And you're going to be in mourning because this was the woman you waited for, the love of your life. Even more so, I was going to mourn because this was the love of my life. And here's what I did. And here's what I did every single day, every single time I remembered. And I made it a point to turn more substantially to the doing of it, because I didn't want my experience of mourning to look anything like the stories that I had heard. It sounded awful and dreadful. It sounded like I would spend the next years from 9:30 in the morning to 9:30 at night looking at what I lost, looking at what wasn't here. Here's what I did. I simply met the moment by being totally present in the moment. And I'm not talking about a little bit of attention to this moment. I mean, turning the focus of my mind's attention to right here in the moment where my feet are. Hineni means here I stand. I stand in the moment, not just as a head. I stand in the moment with my mind and with my body. So I'm embodying my presence in the moment. I'm feeling the moment. I'm looking at what's in front of me in the moment. And I knew that if I made this my practice to be as centered in the moment from moment to moment as often as I could, and I put up tons of Post-it notes, I had 100 ways of reminding myself to do this. Why? Because I knew what waited for me by default was the victim world. I'd be carried to God's word in a stretcher. Right? That's the option. I'm either in the field of fear and loss and lack and limitation, or I'm in the field of love. And I practiced being present in the moment as if my life depended on it. And I will tell anybody who listens, I don't know anybody who says that after 2 years of a period of what should have been and would have been mourning, had I experienced it just as a human being, turned in to the most magical experience I have ever had in my first year. It was magic, and here's why. Life grew me during that time. So at the end of that first year, I was a different, deeper, richer woman, more connected to the allness and beauty and grace of life, because I spent that time practicing what we've been talking about in this hour, choosing to be present, not absent in the moment, choosing to love strong instead of fear strong. It really changes you, and it allows life itself to change you, which is the point of why 2020 is here in the first place.
What a beautiful stepping off point, August. Thank you so much for that. It really is a reminder that 2020 is all about transformation, starting with the self. So thank you. Thank you so much to you and to Chris for these words of wisdom. To respect everybody's time, just want to quickly thank Arfan again and pass the microphone over to David.
Thank you so much, Fred. Really, Dr. Chris Michaels and August Gold, you have been so generous with your time. And when this first came up as a conversation between August and me, and of course she brought Chris into the conversation immediately, you both were really eager to help our community through this really difficult time. And I hope that people take the time to look both of you up. You both have active ministries in town, and they can spend more time with you and learn from you. And I mentioned the word light, that you would be providing us light today. And this is one of those rare occurrences in life when something that you imagined, this surpassed even what I thought we would be able to accomplish in the period of an hour, in terms of really leading us to that and grounding us and providing hope that I don't think we necessarily had when we entered into the Zoom chat. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone who attended today. I hope that you took away from it as much as I did. And I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks so much. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.